Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and I'm going to be sharing with you the frequently asked questions section of this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This is the text that we use for this program, which is a 7-month program, and I've been teaching students for about 6.5 months now the foundation of the teachings of the Buddha, how to develop a life practice, and how to move the mind to this enlightened mental state. And there's various topics that we've been discussing all throughout the entire group learning program. And now we're coming to an end of this iteration of the group learning program and getting ready to restart it on 17th of March. And when we restart it, we'll start from the very beginning of the program and walk all the way through. So there's some students who are starting to join towards the end of this program to kind of start getting acquainted with joining the program. And then of course, there's people who are studying all the way through. So I'd like to welcome all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly, and let you know that there's various topics that we're going to be discussing today. There's kind of a bunch of diverse topics that are covered under this frequently asked questions section. In this entire book, I've been sharing all the various aspects of the teachings that the Buddha taught in order to lead to enlightenment. And there's some content and some questions that students oftentimes ask that didn't necessarily fit into one particular chapter or another. So I put it in the back in 11 different frequently asked questions. And then additional content that's in the back of the book are things like how to determine if you've attained enlightenment, which is what I'm going to be sharing with you today as well. And then I'm also going to be sharing with you the final words of the Buddha. Before he died, he spoke his final words, and I'm going to share those with you today as a way to kind of start to end out our program here of the group learning program. And then next week, I'm going to be sharing on Sunday the 5 hindrances. Now that I've been teaching for 6.5 months of all the things that you need to learn and practice to develop your mind and move to the enlightened mental state where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. Now at the end, I'm going to share with you what's called the 5 hindrances. These are the 5 things that are going to hinder you or stop you or be obstructions to getting to enlightenment. And I'm going to share with you the solutions to those too, how to uproot them out of the mind. So you're going to be learning that next week on Sunday. And then over the next 2 Wednesdays, we'll be doing meditation the same way as we always have. And then on the 17th of March, I'm going to be starting from the very beginning of the program and walking you guys through, helping you to learn all the various teachings that you need from this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, to help you move towards enlightenment. And this is the first volume of a 13-volume book series, and students will sometimes take this group learning program more than once as a way to move into further and further studies of the teachings of the Buddha. So now that we're coming towards the end of this program, you need to ask yourself, is it wise for you to move on to the Pali, Canon, and English study group and start studying that, which is volumes 2 through 13 of the book series. And we meet on Saturdays from 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. And that's a class where we study 10 chapters of those books each individual Saturday. And that's a 1.5-year program to really help fill in the framework that an individual has built if they've completed the group learning program or any of the other foundational programs. So some students might choose to move on to the Pali, Canon, and English study group, and others might choose to continue in the group learning program and continue to learn in this program. And then there's, of course, various courses and retreats that I teach over the month and over the year that are all starting to be live streamed and available through Zoom that you guys can always tune into and learn from those as well. So again, thank you all for joining. Wonderful to have you guys all here. I'm going to transition over to the visual aids to help me share with you guys the content for today's class, which is the 11 frequently asked questions that are in the back of the book. So this first one that is a frequently asked questions that students will ask me oftentimes is, how do I become a Buddhist? Well, I understand where this question is coming from, because many people, when they're kind of moving into something new, they want to become something, or they want to kind of join something. But what I'll share with you up front is that the Buddha himself wasn't Buddhist, and you don't need to be Buddhist either. This is just a label that oftentimes people are assigning to their own self. And now if you assign that to the mind and you identify with I am a Buddhist, you're ultimately going to have to eliminate that as part of the path to enlightenment. So the short answer is you don't need to become a Buddhist. That what you're interested in doing is learning, reflecting, and practicing the teachings of the Buddha. That's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. The Buddha himself wasn't Buddhist. I am not a Buddhist. And people who have progressed on the path to a certain degree, they wouldn't identify with being Buddhist either. Because if you remember way back to the beginning of the program where I taught the universal truth of non-self, where I taught you how the mind oftentimes will cling to the body, which is the self-image, or the mind itself, which is the self-identity, and cling to this. And then when you hear complimentary things, you'll get pleasant feelings. And when you hear degrading or disparaging things, you'll end up getting painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. So if you adopt this label of I am Buddhist, then when somebody compliments Buddhist people and say, oh, Buddhist practitioners are wonderful, they're so friendly and kind and loving, you'll get pleasant feelings. But then, because you can't control what people say, it's only a matter of time before somebody says something degrading and disparaging about Buddhists. So if you identify with I am Buddhist, when you're sitting at a restaurant and 2 tables over, somebody's degrading and disparaging Buddhist, and you identify with I am a Buddhist, now you're going to get angry or frustrated when you hear that. So you're going to need to let go of any kind of labels, not just I am Buddhist, but I am American, or I am a taxi driver, I am a food server, I am a police officer, I am a lawyer, I am a mom, I am a dad. Of course, you perform these roles in life, but the challenge is when the mind clings to this as your identity, thinking that this is who you are. So there's nothing you need to do in order to become a Buddhist. So the Buddha wasn't Buddhist. I am not Buddhist. You don't have to identify as being Buddhist. It would be unwise to do so, because it's just something that you're going to have to eliminate anyway. And there's nobody in the world that can declare this is what it means to be Buddhist. If you do all these things and you have all these things, this means that you are Buddhist. There's nobody that can determine that, because the Buddha didn't determine that during his life, and there's nobody that's come after the Buddha that would be able to put a stamp on that and determine what it means to be a Buddhist. So you'll see different things out there that people will share, but none of that is what I would suggest that you should consider for yourself. That just get rid of any and all kinds of labels like that, and don't feel like you have to adopt those. The second one that I hear oftentimes asked to me is, do I need to give up all my possessions, occupation, and relationships to attain enlightenment? The short answer here is no. You don't need to give up your possessions, occupations, and relationships. Where this is oftentimes coming from is people think that this is what the Buddha did in order to get to enlightenment. But the Buddha actually didn't do this. People think that that's what he did, but that's not what he actually did. He was a prince who was destined to become a king, and he walked away from the royal family, and he went off for 6 years to train his mind. But he ultimately came back to spend time around the area where his kingdom was, and his son ordained with him, his wife ordained with him, his mother, who was actually his stepmother, even many of his cousins and brother-in-laws and different people like this that were part of the royal family came out of the royal family and started to learn with the Buddha to be able to get to enlightenment. So much so that the Buddha's father came and pleaded and begged with him to stop ordaining people from the royal family. So the Buddha didn't eliminate his relationships. He just went away for a period of time in order to train his own mind. But in order for him to teach, in order for him to help people get to enlightenment, he was going to need relationships. And you could say that his occupation was as a teacher. So he didn't give up his relationships nor his occupation. And he didn't give up all his possessions, because he had robes, he had a bowl, he had things like this. So it's not that you need to give away your possessions, your occupations, and your relationships. That's not what's going to produce enlightenment. What you need to eliminate is the longing, the yearning. what we call craving, desire, attachment, the wants, the expectations. So for example, this mobile phone in my hand, this is a possession, and many of us have these mobile phones. You don't need to eliminate the mobile phone to get to enlightenment. What you need to do is eliminate the longing, yearning, the craving, the desire, the wanting it to be permanent. That's what you need to eliminate. Because if you crave and you cling and you hold on to this phone, wanting it to be permanent, when you lose it, when you break it, when somebody steals it, when you misplace it, your mind's going to be shaken up by this. So if you hold on to this phone wanting it to be permanent, then your mind is going to experience discontent feelings, those conditioned feelings. So by training your mind to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment, you can get to a point where you won't be shaken up if you lose your phone or you misplace it or if it breaks, because this phone is impermanent. But with craving, desire, attachment in the mind, it's going to hold on to it, wanting it to be permanent. And then when you experience the impermanent nature of this phone, that's when you'll experience those painful feelings. So you don't need to eliminate all your possessions, your occupation, your relationships. You just need to train your mind to eliminate the pollutions that are causing the mind to experience these discontent feelings. If everybody gave up all their possessions, you would have nothing. You would basically be naked in the forest, right? And this isn't actually possible. So it's not possible for everyone to give away all their possessions. It's not possible for everyone in the world to give away their occupation. And it's not possible to end all your relationships, because you need people in your life in order to support and encourage and kind of help you through life. You know, we all are our own individual person, our own individual being, but we all have this interconnectivity between each other where we're supporting each other and helping each other in life and helping each other to acquire food and clothing and other things like that. So you just need to eliminate the craving, desire, attachment for the possessions or for the occupation or the attachment in your relationships. And this is what the path to enlightenment is teaching you how to do. The third question that I typically get is, what is reincarnation and rebirth, and are they the same thing? So what I'll share with you is they aren't the same thing, and the Buddha didn't teach reincarnation. He taught the cycle of rebirth, and these things are vastly different. So let me help you understand what the cycle of rebirth is first, because that's what the Buddha taught, and then I will teach you what people talk about in relationship to reincarnation, and they assign it to Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings, but this isn't actually what the Buddha taught. So what the cycle of rebirth is this is coming from the original language of the Buddha in the original Pali text. The word that's being used is samsara. That's what the Buddha is describing, is this process of samsara. And this is oftentimes translated as the cycle of rebirth. But when you hear me describe it, I would encourage you to think of it as the cycle of new existence, because there isn't anything that's actually truly being reborn. It's a new life every single time. So what the cycle of rebirth is that each being is in this continuous cycle of rebirth, continually being reborn over and over and over and over and over again, based on the condition of the mind. If there's craving in the mind at the time of death, this is the cause or condition. This is the fuel that leads to rebirth, that there is going to be rebirth. So by eliminating craving, desire, attachment, the mind gets to enlightenment, where it's no longer experiencing discontentedness. The mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. But also you eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing rebirth. So if you think about a fire has logs on it. And when this fire has logs on it, that's the fuel. And as long as this fire has fuel, it's going to continue to burn. And this fire continuing to burn, it's going to throw off sparks. And these sparks are going to be carried by the wind, and it's going to land, and it's going to ignite a brand new fire. That's a brand new fire. It's not the same fire as before. It's a brand new fire. And this is what the Buddha describes about the mind, and how craving is the fuel that causes rebirth and causes a new existence. So if you think about cardboard box A as one existence, and this cardboard box is a certain size, certain color, certain shape, a certain texture, and now there's certain contents in that cardboard box. Well, when that cardboard box withers away and it deteriorates, the contents of that cardboard box still exist. The cardboard box itself is deteriorated, but the contents are still there. So now the contents are going to produce a new mind or a new box. So now this new box, cardboard box B, it's a completely different color, different shape, different texture, different size, but the contents of craving and residual memories from cardboard box A came into cardboard box B. But it's a completely new cardboard box. The old cardboard box wasn't reborn. It's just that the contents went from one cardboard box to the other. So this is what's happening in the human mind, or in the mind in animals and all the other beings that are in existence within the cycle of rebirth, that if they have craving at the time of death, that's the spark that leads to this new consciousness being developed. And now the craving and residual memories come into the new mind. And this whole cycle of rebirth is actually independently verifiable, just like everything else on the path to enlightenment. You can independently verify that the cycle of rebirth is true. You may not have the wisdom of how to do that right now, but if you would like to study to that degree, you can study and actually learn how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. This is something I usually suggest to students to put aside when they first get started, because there's many other things to learn when you're first getting started. But eventually, after maybe a year and a half, 2 years of studying and developing your mind, you might be ready to approach the cycle of rebirth. And at that time, there's books that I share, there's content that I share with you to help you learn how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. You might have been experiencing something already that is an indicator for you that the cycle of rebirth is true. If you've experienced deja vu, which is you're experiencing something now in this life, you're doing something, you're in some situation where it seems utterly familiar to you, but it's not something that you've done in this life, and you know that that's not something you've done in this life, but this thing that you're doing just seems so utterly familiar to you. This is the residual memories of your past lives surfacing up to the surface of the mind. And typically this lasts for maybe 5 or 10 seconds or so. And what a person will usually do is just push it to the side and ignore it. But what I'm sharing with you is what this is this is an indication of your past lives. This is the residual memories that are surfacing to the top of your mind. And as you are learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha, and you're purifying your mind, getting more and more pollutions out of the mind, you are more likely to experience the residual memories of your past lives. So the Buddha taught the cycle of rebirth for specific reasons. He didn't teach it just because he would like to slip something in and just kind of teach it on a whim. He directly experienced his past lives. He understood and observed his past lives, so he knew about these different realms like hell, animal, afflicted spirits, the human realm, and the heavenly realm. None of these realms are permanent, and the Buddha never used the cycle of rebirth as a way to guilt, shame, or fear you into learning his teachings. He's explaining to you the way the world is. The teachings of the Buddha aren't explaining to you the way the world should be, that if everybody learns and understands certain rules, and if we go around and everybody follows those rules, the world's going to be peaceful. That's not what the Buddha actually did. He's explaining to you the way the world is, and by understanding the way the world is, your mind can reside more peaceful and more joyful in the present moment. So as you're learning and practicing things like the Eightfold Path and training your mind and uprooting the pollution out of your mind, it's possible that you might observe your past lives, you might have communication with beings in one of these other realms, or you might actually see one of these beings. Even though the hell beings, afflicted spirits, and heavenly beings are formless, it's possible for some beings to actually see formless beings. So if you didn't understand the cycle of rebirth, and you didn't understand these 5 realms of existence, and you're lifting this pollution out of your mind, and you start observing your past lives, maybe you have vivid memories of being murdered or raped or something like that, even though you know it didn't happen in this life, or you started to experience communication with beings in these other realms, or you started seeing these beings from the other realms, you might actually think you're going crazy if you didn't understand the cycle of rebirth in these 5 realms. So the Buddha is teaching the way the world is, and then a teacher like me is providing you the guidance to help you understand how to independently verify this continuous cycle of rebirth. And this is something that students learn with me later when they get deeper into their learning and developing. In this book series, volume 11 is titled The Realms of Existence. And that's volume 11 out of the 13 volumes for a reason, because that's usually when it's wise for somebody to start approaching that, about a year and a half or 2 years into their development on the path to enlightenment. So that's a little bit about the cycle of rebirth. Now, what people talk about with reincarnation, which is just a belief, it's just a concept. There's nothing in the teachings of the Buddha that is a belief. Everything can be independently verified, and you can see the truth for yourself. So the cycle of rebirth is independently verifiable. But what's being described as reincarnation is actually in direct conflict with many of the teachings of the Buddha. When you learn about reincarnation, what people teach you is they say that there's a soul that is this permanent soul that goes from life to life to life, and this soul picks up a new body, and you're exactly the same being from one life to the next, you just have a different body, essentially is what they're teaching. This conflicts with the teachings of the Buddha, the very simple, very most basic teachings of the Buddha, like the universal truth of impermanence. It conflicts with that because the Buddha didn't teach that there's this permanent thing that goes from life to life to life. So it conflicts with his most simple, most basic, most beginning and fundamental teaching of the universal truth of impermanence. It also conflicts with his universal truth of non-self, that he taught that there is no self. And it also conflicts with a teaching that is referred to as his undeclared teachings. The Buddha taught for 45 years, and there's a large collection of his teachings. And at different times, he'll say, remember, students, what did I teach? I taught this. And what he describes is he describes the Four Noble Truths. The problem in the unenlightened mind, the cause of the problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward. And then he says, remember, monks, or remember, students, what I did not teach. I did not teach these things. And he goes through 10 things that he doesn't teach and that he didn't teach during his lifetime. And one of the things that he didn't teach is whether there is a soul or there isn't a soul. He never taught that. So when you hear people referring to reincarnation and a soul, you can understand that this conflicts with 3 of the Buddhist teachings. And even though they're attributing it to the Buddha, it's not actually what he taught. He taught samsara, which people refer to as the cycle of rebirth, but I would encourage you to think of it as the cycle of new existence, because every single existence is a brand new existence. There's nothing that's actually being reborn. And then the fourth question is, can I be Buddhist without believing in rebirth? Well, the first one, you kind of already know that I suggest that people don't identify with I am Buddhist. So from that perspective, you understand what I shared. But then in terms of, can I essentially practice these teachings of the Buddha without believing in rebirth? Well, the short answer is yes. Please do that. Please do not believe in the cycle of rebirth. You should never believe anything in these teachings. Don't believe any aspect of the teachings, including the cycle of rebirth. Instead, learn the teachings, investigate them, examine them, reflect on them to independently verify them, and then practice them in order to train your mind and uproot the pollutions out of the mind. So there's nothing in the teachings of the Buddha that I would ever suggest to you to believe, because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. And what an individual on the path to enlightenment is looking to do is acquire wisdom, because that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment, is by acquiring wisdom. So if you're just believing in the cycle of rebirth, you don't know whether it's true or false. But if you independently verify it based on the teachings of the Buddha and the content that I can share with you to help you independently verify it, you won't be believing in the cycle of rebirth. You'll know that it's true. Sometimes people ask me as I go about the world, they'll say, do you believe in the natural law of karma, or do you believe in the cycle of rebirth? And I say, nope, absolutely not. I don't believe in the cycle of rebirth, and I don't believe in the natural law of karma either. I know that these things are true with 100% certainty because I've seen it with my own eyes, my own direct experience. I can see the cause and effect and the action and result. I can see it's the results of your decisions, that when you make a certain wise decision, it produces a wholesome result. And when you make an unwise decision, it produces an unwholesome result. Natural law of karma is not mystical or magical. It's not any kind of punishment or rewards. It's not about who's to blame or who's at fault. There's no being that's overseeing this. It's about your life, your decisions and your results. And you can see this as clear as day the more that you practice the teachings of the Buddha. As you're learning them and you're practicing them, you'll get to a point where you don't believe in the natural law of karma, but you'll know it's true 100%. And the same thing with the cycle of rebirth, that you'll get to a point where, no, I don't believe in the cycle of rebirth. I know with 100% certainty that it's true. And that's why I can look people in the eyes and explain to them, here, this is what the cycle of rebirth is, and here's how you can independently confirm it. And then each individual student needs to do that work for themselves so that they can then independently confirm for themselves, not just the cycle of rebirth, but all the various teachings of the Buddha. And that's how you awaken to the wisdom to be able to attain enlightenment. I'll now talk about this fifth question, and then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have. Remember, you can put the questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So I'll do that after I answer this fifth question here. This fifth question is, what does it mean to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha? And is there a ceremony to do so? So what the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha is this is referring to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community. The Dhamma, the Sangha are Pali words that refer to the teachings and the community. This is referred to as the triple gem or the triple jewel. In order to get to enlightenment, you have to have all three of these things. You need to have confidence in the Buddha, you need to have access to his teachings, and you need to be part of a community. If you just had one of these things, you wouldn't be able to actually get to enlightenment. Or if you had two of these things, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. It's only when you have all three that you're going to be able to make your way to enlightenment. So if you had confidence in the Buddha, but you didn't have access to his teachings, or you weren't part of a community, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. Or if you had access to his teachings, and you didn't have confidence in the Buddha, and you weren't part of a community, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. Or if you were just part of a community and you didn't have confidence in the Buddha and you didn't have access to his teachings, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. And as I mentioned, even if you just had two of these things, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. You're going to need to develop confidence in the Buddha. You're going to need to gain access to his teachings, which is what you have with all the resources that I share with you. And you're going to need to be part of a community, which you're part of as part of this international community that we have, which is based here in Chiang Mai, but we have people all over the world that are part of this international community, and we all connect in through different courses and retreats, both online and in person. So as you grow and you develop, you can build more and more confidence in the Buddha. You can build more confidence in his teachings, confidence in the community, confidence in your teacher, and then confidence in your own ability to get to enlightenment. This is what will help you eliminate doubt. When you first get on the path to enlightenment, you might have doubt. You might be doubtful whether the Buddha actually lived. You might be doubtful whether his teachings lead to enlightenment. You might be doubtful whether this community can really support you to get to enlightenment. You might be doubtful in your teacher and their ability to help you get to enlightenment. And you might have doubt about your own ability to get to enlightenment. But as you learn and you investigate the teachings, you develop your life practice and you see such significant progress to the condition of your mind and your life that you'll get to a point where you have no doubt that these teachings are leading to an improved condition of mind. And this is what it means to take refuge in the Buddha. Because what the word refuge means is it means protection. There's no ceremony, there's no rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship as part of the teachings of the Buddha at all. And there's no ceremony that can protect you. There's no ceremony that can help you to acquire this refuge. The Buddha taught during his lifetime, and he taught about how people are seeking this refuge by running to the forest or running to shrines and running to all these places. And he says, this isn't a refuge. He's saying that's not going to protect you. If you run to the forest, if you run to a shrine, none of these things are going to protect you. If you ran and stayed in a mountain, in a cabin, really far distant in the world, that's not going to protect you. What's going to protect you is your wisdom and your wise decisions. If you have wise decision making and it's supported by wisdom, this is what's going to protect you. So by taking refuge in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, what this means is that you're learning and developing your mind, you're acquiring wisdom, and now as you make wiser and wiser decisions, you'll experience more and more wholesome results in your life. But when you make unwise decisions, you'll experience unwholesome results. So if you go out in the world and you're aggressive and hostile and bitter with people, those people are going to come to try to hurt you and injure you and maybe murder you. And there's no protection. You can't stay in a cabin. You can't run off to a distant land in order to get that protection. Because if your mind is unwise and you go out in the world and you're bitter, harsh, and hostile and aggressive with people doing unwise things, you're going to continue to experience this harm coming back to you. So there's no protection in a ceremony or in a remote cabin in the forest or anything like that. The real protection is your wise decision making, supported by the wisdom that you learn through training your mind on the path to enlightenment. That's what's going to ultimately protect you. So when the Buddha talks about having this refuge in the Buddha, the teachings, in the community, what he's talking about is learning the teachings and investigating them, training your mind, acquiring wisdom, and now that's the true protection, that your mind can be protected from all the discontentedness, that as you're experiencing various contact in the world, you're not going to experience anger and sadness and frustration, agitation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, sorrow, displeasure, despair. All of this is eliminated as you get closer and closer to enlightenment. And that's the true refuge or the true protection. So let me know if you guys have any questions on anything that I just shared. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. Okay, it looks like Slav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
I have a couple questions, if you don't mind. First question, what do you think when we're talking about tree refugee and we're talking about Sangha? Virtual Sangha is concerned to be like Sangha, parts of tree refuge?
Yes, because what you're gaining from being part of a Sangha or a community is that you're interacting with other people who are on the path and that are actively learning and actively practicing. Because you'll learn from a teacher like me through my books, videos, podcasts, through discourses, through personal guidance, things like this. You'll learn with me. But you're also going to pick up a lot of understanding from observing your fellow community members, like the way that you just asked that question so calmly, so politely, so respectfully. Somebody else hearing that is like, I really like how Slav just asked that question. And now maybe when they go to college or university or maybe at their business, asking a question of their boss or something like this, they might choose to practice similarly. Or if they see a person practicing generosity or loving kindness or compassion or some other wholesome quality on the path, this is how you learn from a community. So by being part of a community like this, even being online like this, you're actually still learning because you can pick up various ways of practice through interacting with other people who are on the path to enlightenment.
Thank you, teacher Dave. My apology, can I ask another two questions?
Oh, sure. You don't have to apologize. You can ask any questions you like.
My second question, when we're talking about samsara, rebirth, what kind of, I'm gonna put this word, energy or something go from one life to another life? Because like reincarnation, they use soul. What Buddha really means by samsara rebirth?
Yeah, so it's a brand new existence every single time. He never describes anything other than craving or residual memories that moves from one life to the next. But that's not a rebirth. So even though people are using the English words, the cycle of rebirth, he used the word samsara. So what people are doing nowadays is they're trying to translate this word samsara, and they're using it to describe what he's talking about in this process. And they're describing it in the English language as the cycle of rebirth. But for me, when I understand samsara in the way that the Buddha teaches it, I wouldn't translate it as the cycle of rebirth because there's nothing being reborn. I still use the word rebirth because that's what people are familiar with. But if you read the book and you listen to what I teach in classes, what I teach students to do is think about it as the cycle of new existence. That's how I would translate it, because each individual existence is completely new. There's nothing moving from one existence to the other. In terms of rebirth, what's moving is craving and residual memories. That's what's moving from one life to the next and producing the new mind. So there's nothing that's actually being reborn.
And it's very similar what sometimes people call to become.
Well, becoming, that is to have an existence, that is to come into the world, into an existence. So that is part of the process of experiencing a new existence. If you read and you learn dependent origination, this is where the Buddha teaches the 12 interlinking steps of how beings are reborn into the world and why beings are reborn into the world. And one of those steps is what I translate as existence, but some people translate it as becoming. So this is one of the challenges, is that because of impermanence, a lot of people are using lots of different words to describe what it is that the Buddha taught. And for me, I standardize on set word choices so that you can understand what the Buddha taught and what will lead to this enlightened mental state. So I don't use the word becoming, although other people do, and I understand why, but I use the word existence in the cycle of rebirth rather than becoming.
Makes sense, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And last question, at least from me, is how do we know when we're ready to move from value 1 to another study of Buddha words?
When you're reading volume 1 and when you're attending these classes, you're going to ultimately get to a point where you pretty much know what I'm going to say before I even say it, or you know the words on the page before you even read them. So that's one indication. Another indication is you should have a well-developed practice of the Eightfold Path, which includes a meditation practice. So if you can recite the Eightfold Path, meaning you understand right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and you can describe each individual factor, because each individual factor has certain aspects to it. So if you know the Eightfold Path, each individual factor, and you know each individual aspect of each factor, and you've developed that in your life, and you've got the meditation practice going on a consistent, ongoing basis, that would be an ideal time for you to move into the Pali Canon and English study group, because you should be able to put all that together in a certain period of time. Everybody's a little bit different, but you should be able to put that together in a certain period of time. So when you understand the words on the page, you understand what I'm saying, and you've taken these classes enough times that you know what I'm going to almost be saying before I say it, and you've put together your Eightfold Path to include meditation, that's a really good time to move in to the Pali Canon and English study group in volume 2 through 13.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. Okay, so we have a question coming in on Facebook from Mayu Lee. She says, in regards to rebirth, can we think of it as new mind with old content, where craving and clinging are more pronounced? Yes, that's a fine way to think about it, because that's exactly what it is. It's a completely new mind and it's old content. But you're also going to get new content too in the new mind as well. And then you say where craving and clinging are more pronounced. So because of craving, that's what's leading to that next birth. And you can see that to be true because every single baby that's ever born has craving right from the beginning. This is why a baby cries when it first comes into the world, because it's craving to be in mom's stomach, and now it experiences that first big impermanence. And because it has craving to be in that stomach or in that womb, when it comes out and experiences that impermanence, it's not getting what it wants. It's got a perfect life in there in the mother's womb. Everything's being piped into the umbilical cord. It's just hanging out all by itself. And then all of a sudden, well, womb, here it comes into the world. And wah! The reason why it's discontent when it comes into the world is because of its craving. And you can see that every being coming into the world has craving. That's the fuel that's causing rebirth. This is one of the ways that you can confirm what the Buddha shared. So yeah, you could definitely think of it that way, Mayuli. Okay, so now that we've covered questions for these, let's go to the next 6, which is 6 through 11. So question number 6 that I oftentimes get is, what is our purpose in life? What is the purpose of our human existence? The short answer that I share is that there is no purpose to this human life in terms of this higher purpose, right? You might have certain goals, you might have certain objectives in this life, but it's really unwise to adopt this idea that I have a purpose in this life. Because now, if you think you only have a certain purpose, you're going to be scouring the earth looking for that purpose. And then when you think you found it, which you'll probably be obsessively trying to find it, you'll kind of cling to it. And then when things start to change in your life, you'll be holding on to this purpose, thinking that this is my purpose in life, I can't let it go. And your mind is going to be holding on and holding on and holding on. Where I suspect that this idea of what is my purpose in life comes from is it comes from the human ego. Whereas if you go back to prehistoric times, I suspect that prehistoric human beings, they weren't concerned with what is their purpose in life. They were just worried about their survival. They were trying to figure out how to clothe themselves, how to feed themselves, how to make themselves warm by rubbing sticks together. They were just trying to figure out how to survive. Because at prehistoric times, human beings weren't the dominant creature on this planet. There were beings that were much more dominant than we are on this planet. But over time, as we've evolved, we've become the dominant creature on the planet. We've completely mastered things like food systems, water systems, electrical systems, educational systems. We've really mastered all these things, where in the past, it was kind of every man for themselves, so to speak. And those beings were just interested in survival, and that's it. But now, having become the dominant creature on the planet, and we have all this excessive time available to us where we're not out in the woods scouring for food and supplies and resources, we have all this time available to us, and people oftentimes just think like, what is our purpose here? Like, why are we here? Like, what are we doing here? And what I share with people is there is no purpose. And the more that you can see that nothing in this world is worth holding on to, that nothing in this world is going to bring you permanent satisfaction because it's the mind just clinging and holding on, the easier it'll be for you to let go of this world and move on. Whereas if you think you have a certain purpose in this world, you can cling to that and then find it to be really difficult to go around and kind of scour the earth to find out what is your purpose. And then once you think you found a particular purpose, you might hold on to that with dear life and then be very discontent when things start changing in your life. So, of course, you can have certain goals, certain objectives. Life can be very fun, very interesting, very intriguing to spend time with various people. But it's when the mind is clinging to these things, thinking that you have some kind of purpose and you got to go out in the world and change the world, that you're going to find that the discontentedness is arising. It's a real burden to carry that you think that you need to go out into the world and change the world. And there's 8 billion beings in this world. If everybody marched off into the world thinking they need to change the world and they have some purpose to fulfill, this would create a lot of problems in the world. Instead, what I would encourage you to think about is you don't need to go out and change the world, because you can't change the world. What you need to do is you need to understand the world. And that's what the teachings of the Buddha are doing for you, is he's explaining to you the way the world is. And when you understand the way the world is, then you can navigate this world more readily. But when you don't understand this world and you see all these problems in the world, you might think you have to march off into the world and change it. But you can't change the world, because the world is functioning based on these natural laws. It would be like, I'm going to go out into the world and change the natural law of gravity. You can't change the natural law of gravity. You don't have the ability to do that. All these natural laws that the Buddha taught, you can't go off into the world and change those. The only thing that you can do is you can learn them and you can understand them. And now you can navigate the world more readily, where you're not having struggles and difficulties. You can change your own mind, but it's each individual person that needs to change their own mind. That's how the world becomes better and better, through each individual being awakening to the wisdom of the natural laws of existence. And as each being chooses to do that on their own, that's when the world slowly becomes more and more harmonious with each other. But you can get to the peace and joy of the enlightened mind without other beings choosing to be on the path to enlightenment. You can get to enlightenment regardless of what other beings are choosing to do in the world. But oftentimes people see the calamity and the difficulties in the world, and they think that the way to get to peacefulness is go out into the world and change the world and change other people to do things your way. And this is where someone might think about, well, what is my purpose in this human existence? And that's where I share with people that there is no purpose. You have certain goals, you have certain objectives, you might be working to accomplish certain things, but ultimately what you would like to do is learn and practice the teachings to train your mind and get to enlightenment. So if you don't like the idea of you have no purpose in life, then you might adopt the understanding that your goal or your objective in this life is to attain enlightenment, so that you don't keep coming back to this world over and over and over again, to a world of nothing. It's only the ego that thinks that there's some higher purpose to what we're doing here on earth. The monkeys out in the forest, and the dogs on the street, and the rabbits in the jungle, they're not thinking about what is their purpose in life. They're just trying to survive, right? So us human beings at one time were that way too. But now, because we have all this extra time, people must think like, wow, there's got to be some purpose here. But this is the ego that's doing that. So when you work on the path to enlightenment to eliminate the ego, you can see that there's really nothing here worth holding on to, and nothing that you hold on to is permanent anyway, and it's just going to lead to discontentedness. So you can eliminate your ego, see that there's nothing here to hold on to permanently, and then escape this continuous cycle of rebirth that has you coming back over and over and over again. The seventh question of the frequently asked questions section is, can I exercise the physical body and still attain enlightenment? The short answer is yes. Sometimes people know that ordained practitioners typically don't do physical activity in terms of exercising, so therefore they think that that's what they need to do in order to get to enlightenment. But this isn't actually true. The teachings of the Buddha are based in wise decision making, and as you make wise decisions, it produces wholesome results for you. And when you make unwise decisions, it produces unwholesome results. Well, it's a wise decision to exercise and ensure that this physical body is healthy. This physical body isn't you, it's not who you are, but this mind is inhabiting this physical body. And now it's wise to take care of this physical body. This physical body can't be permanently healthy, but you can make certain wise decisions about your physical activity, the food that you ingest, any kind of exercise or hobbies, and you can make wise decisions that's going to help to maintain as much health as possible. Even though you can't have permanent health, you can have improved health for an extended period of time if you're making wise decisions around the health of this body. So there's no harm in actually exercising, and nowadays the ordained practitioners are starting to exercise a bit because they're noticing that they have a lot of diabetes and obesity that's starting to come into the ordained community. And there's some temples here in Thailand that are kind of trying out putting some gym equipment into the temples so that the ordained practitioners have the ability to exercise, because they know that that would be very wise for them. But what you need to be aware of is that with exercise, the mind can get attached to it. The problem isn't the exercise itself, it's the mind longing, yearning, and holding on to it. So when you're exercising, let's just say you had a set, rigid schedule. Every day for 6 days a week, I'm going to exercise at exactly 8 a.m. Well, you're not going to be able to do that because of the universal truth of impermanence. So if you're going to choose to exercise, be sure you understand that your exercise is impermanent. Some days you're going to be able to exercise, other days you aren't. And if you're attached to your exercise, on the days where you exercise, you're going to get happy and excited. On the days where you can't exercise, you're going to be grumpy and irritable. So you need to be sure that if you're exercising, you do it in moderation and that you don't get attached to it, so that you're not grumpy and irritable when you don't exercise. It's not biological, which is causing the grumpiness and irritability. It's the craving, desire, attachment, wanting this exercise to be permanent. And when you exercise, you feel happy. And when you don't exercise, you feel grumpy. And you think that this is maybe biological, but it's not. It's actually inside the mind. It's the craving, desire, attachment. So be sure you're not attached to it, and kind of mix up your schedule where some days you're exercising and maybe some days you aren't, so that way the mind doesn't try to latch onto it, craving it to be permanent. The other thing you need to be aware of with exercise is that sometimes an individual, while they're exercising, can become arrogant and boastful. You might take on some conceit where you're looking in the mirror with your personal existence view and pumping up your arms and kind of admiring your arms or your shoulders or your back, or you might be looking down on other people who don't exercise or people who can't lift as much weight as you. You might be looking down on them with arrogance or boastfulness or pride. This is going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment. So the problem isn't the exercise itself, it's how the mind's choosing to engage in the exercise. So that's what you need to ensure that you're paying attention to, that you don't get an attachment to your exercise, and that you don't get any conceit or personal existence view doesn't come in with your exercise. Number 8, is medicine in medical procedures for the body an attachment? The answer is no. That's the short answer to this. But let me be sure I help you to understand that it's not the object itself that is the attachment. Where this question comes from is people don't necessarily understand what a craving, desire, attachment is. What a craving, desire, attachment is it's a longing, it's a yearning. It's thinking that this external thing is going to provide some kind of lasting satisfaction. So for example, I've had a deviated septum for most of my life because I had my nose broken when I was 4 years old. I was playing some American football, jumped on the ball, and somebody accidentally kicked me in the nose and it broke my nose. And then it never was fixed because the doctors weren't interested in fixing it because they felt like it would cause difficulties to my face and the growth of my face. So it wasn't until much later in life that they actually went in and started to fix this deviated septum. So this surgery to do the deviated septum and fix that is called a rhinoplasty. And this is done for medical purposes for someone like me that had difficulties breathing. And there are people who do this medical procedure for cosmetic purposes, to straighten out their nose or to make their nose look a certain way. So it's not the medical procedure itself that is the attachment, because the medical procedure is the same. It's about the mind, whether you're longing, yearning, and what are you trying to accomplish with this medicine or this medical procedure. So in one situation, a medical procedure is needed in order to sustain life or to produce better breathing. In another situation, someone might be doing it cosmetically in order to have this personal existence view and for this self-image to look a certain way. And in this situation, the mind is most likely attached to the medical procedure. But the medical procedure isn't the actual attachment, not the object. It's what's going on in the mind. And the same thing is true about medicine. You can have certain medicines that are needed to heal the body, like maybe pain relief or something like this. And there's people that take medicine for certain medical purposes. But then certain medicines can be abused also and used for a high. So it's not the medicine itself that is the attachment. It's the way that the mind is longing, yearning, and holding on to it. So you'll need to pay attention to those kinds of things, understanding that it's not the object itself that is the attachment. And I'll give you an example that you can maybe understand a bit better here to show you that it's not the object itself that is the attachment. Say that I was going on a hike and I had a liter of water in my car and I drove to the hiking trail and I forgot my water in the car and I'm on this trail about 30 minutes down the trail. And say I realize that I've forgotten the water back at the car and my mind becomes all shaken up and I'm like, oh my goodness, my water. And you hastily make your way back to the car. Maybe you sprain your ankle along the way and you swing open the door, you grab your water. Yes, my water. Well, in this situation, someone's mind is attached to the water. They're longing, they're yearning. Now, say the same exact thing occurs where somebody drives to a trail, they get out, they forget their water, they're 30 minutes down the trail, but now they realize, I forgot my water back at the car. I'm going to be out here for about 6 or 8 hours, so I should probably turn around and go get my water. This would be a wise thing for me to do. And now you just calmly make your way back to the car, you open your door, you get your water, and now you continue on your trail, right? In this situation, the person doesn't have an attachment to the water. So in both of these situations, the object is the same, the water. In the first example, the individual has a craving, desire, attachment. They're longing, they're yearning, they're wanting this water to be permanent. And this is why their mind's shaken up. Whereas if they have their water, they're happy. But if they don't have their water, their mind is upset or angry or frustrated or agitated or annoyed or some other discontent feeling, maybe stress or having anxiety. So it's what's going on in the mind. Because you see the second example that I gave, the person calmly makes their way back to the car, gets their water and goes on. Again, the object's exactly the same. It's the water. The difference is what's going on inside the mind. The second person, they don't have a craving, desire, attachment. They just calmly make their way back to the car and take their water and go on the hike. So this is how you can understand craving, desire, attachment is in the mind. It's not the object itself. So the medicine or the medical procedure isn't the attachment. It's how the mind relates to this object. It's the longing, the yearning in the mind. Number 9, what significance can I apply to dreams? what I usually share with people is there's no significance to your dreams whatsoever. The best thing to do is just wake up. When you realize that you've woken up and now you remember a dream, just put it in the past. Just understand that it's in the past. It's not true reality. It hasn't really happened. Just cut it off, let it go, and go on with your day. That's the best thing you can do when you realize that you've been dreaming. But if you're having a recurring dream, this is not something that I put in the book. If you're having a recurring dream, and in this dream, there tends to be a recurring theme, like maybe you're kind of dying in your dream and you're waking up being afraid and scared and fearful. This is an indication to you that your mind has a craving, desire, attachment for life and for existence, and your mind isn't comfortable with death. And by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have any fear in your mind at all, including the fear of death. So if you're noticing that you're having a recurring dream like something like that, that's something that can help you on the path to enlightenment, where you can reach out to your teacher and you can let them know, hey, I'm having this recurring dream about death and I wake up afraid and fearful. What can I do to eliminate this fear? Because there's actually tools and techniques that you can use in order to eliminate your fear of death. Or say you have a recurring dream of a life partner or a boyfriend or girlfriend or somebody else in your life that maybe you haven't seen them for 5 or 10 years. You thought they were like long in the past, but you've been having this recurring dream of that person. And this is showing you that your mind is still holding on to this individual. So this can be another thing that you might choose to reach out to your teacher about so that you can eliminate that craving, desire, attachment. But by and large, don't apply any significance to dreams. This is the ego that oftentimes is in there, like, oh, I dreamed that I was rich and wealthy, and does that mean I'm going to get rich and wealthy in the next 3 months? You know, somebody might go out and consult 3, 4, 5, 6 different dream interpreters, and they're probably going to get 3, 4, 5, 6 different impressions of what this dream actually means. So if you go down that path, this is the mind craving and longing and yearning, and oftentimes it's the ego in there trying to apply some kind of significance to your dreams. And I encourage you to just leave all that behind, and you can experience a lot more peace and a lot more joy that way. But if you have the recurring dreams, like I mentioned, you might need to reach out to somebody to get help to eliminate your cravings, your clinging that's producing that. Number 10, why is enlightenment permanent? Well, when people learn about the universal truth of impermanence, and then I describe enlightenment as permanent, they usually don't understand necessarily. They're like, hold on a second, I thought you said everything around you is impermanent. Well, yeah, everything around you that's in the world is impermanent. What the Buddha describes is conditioned objects and unconditioned objects. He doesn't say everything is impermanent. Just like me, I don't describe everything is impermanent. I say everything in the world is impermanent, meaning everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell, everything you taste, everything that comes in contact with the body, and your various thoughts and ideas. These are all impermanent. These are called conditioned objects. A conditioned object will arise, it will change, and it will fade away. This is the universal truth of impermanence, that a conditioned object is impermanent. It arises, it changes, and it fades away. This is why when you experience happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, those pleasant feelings, those are impermanent because they're conditioned feelings. You're basing your inner feeling on some condition. So if it's sunny outside, you will be happy. Or if your bank account is this, you will be happy. Or if your mom or your dad or your brothers or your sisters or your children do this, you will be happy. These are conditioned feelings that they arise, they change, and they fade away. This is why you haven't been able to get to permanent happiness yet, because your mind is experiencing conditioned feelings, that you're basing your inner feelings on some condition. And as long as that condition is met, meaning it's sunny outside, you will be happy. But because you base your feeling on the sun is impermanent. So that means your feeling of happiness is impermanent too. So as soon as it rains or it snows or some other weather that you don't like, you're going to experience anger, sadness, frustration, disappointment, or some other discontent feeling. So the mind in the unenlightened state is experiencing conditioned feelings because the mind is basing its inner feelings on some condition. So therefore it experiences conditioned pleasant feelings, conditioned painful feelings, and conditioned feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. By the time you get to enlightenment, you've eliminated the causes and conditions in the mind that are producing these conditioned feelings. There are certain pollutions that are in the mind that are causing it to form these conditioned feelings that are arising, they're changing, and they're fading away. But when you clear those conditions out of the mind, your mind is now unconditioned. It's purified. So now you're experiencing the unconditioned mental qualities of peace, calm, serenity, contentedness, and joy. You're experiencing unconditioned happiness, where in the unenlightened state, you were experiencing conditional happiness. The happiness was arising, it was changing, and it was fading away because you were basing your happiness on some condition, like the sun. And then when it rains, you get frustrated or agitated or some other discontent feeling. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's purified of craving, desire, attachment. You're no longer craving for the sun to be permanent. You understand that the sun is impermanent. And when you see it's sunny outside, it's like, sweet, it's sunny outside. Let's go outside and play. But you take a few steps outside and it starts pouring down raining. You're like, well, I guess I'm not going outside to play. Let's go back inside. Maybe I'll read a book. Maybe I'll cook some food. I'll do something else. And you can maintain your joy because your joy wasn't based on the sun. So therefore, when the sun goes away, you're still joyful because your happiness and your joy is unconditioned. It doesn't need any condition for it to exist. You've purified the mind and now you're experiencing these unconditioned mental qualities. So a conditioned feeling those are impermanent. They arise, they change, and they fade away. But an unconditioned mental quality like peace and joy, these are permanent. Once you attain unconditioned peace and unconditioned joy, those qualities of mind of the enlightened mental state, they are permanent because they're not based on any condition. So they don't arise, they don't change, and they don't fade away. This is why enlightenment is permanent. And the Buddha never said that everything is impermanent. He said all conditioned objects are impermanent. So number 11 here, why are donations of support for teachers of Gotama Buddha's teaching so important? So after I answer this, I'll open up to any questions that you guys have. So there's two main reasons why donations are provided and why they're important. The first one is that it helps with the continuation of the teachings of the Buddha. That while we offer these teachings at no cost to all of our students, whether it's books or videos, podcasts, classes, courses, retreats, personal guidance, and all these kinds of things, it's available to students at no cost. It actually does cost money to offer teachings. Nowadays, you can't exist in the world without some kind of financial support. So computers, microphones, lights, projectors, meditation cushions. At the temple, we pay for electric and water and things like this. There's going to be some expense associated with offering these teachings. So by students choosing to offer donations, it helps to allow the teachings of the Buddha to continue in the world. And we can then purchase the things that we need in order to offer these teachings. Whenever donations of financial support are being offered, what you should see is a teacher is using a small portion of those for their own life, that they're using those in order to sustain their life for food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical care. But then you should see that this teacher is offering classes, courses, retreats. They have various resources that they're purchasing in order to bring the teachings into the world and help people to understand what the teachings are. Here in Thailand, they take it very seriously if somebody was trying to enrich themselves through sharing the teachings of the Buddha. You don't really see this much at all. I only ever know of one case where this has occurred, where there was an ordained practitioner who was taking in a whole lot of money and they were using it for their own indulgences. They had like Fendi bags, they had Gucci sunglasses, they were chartering private planes and flying around and different things like this. And the Thai people found out about this and they actually arrested the person, put them through the court system. They were found guilty and they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. This person actually left and went to the USA, and the Thai government put out a Interpol warrant. They had the US police arrest this person in California and they extradited them back to Thailand. they put them through the court system, and then they were found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. So the Thai people take this very seriously if somebody was out there sharing the teachings of the Buddha and trying to enrich themselves. It's unfortunate that in other places it's not like this, because there's some places that use traditional teachings like Christianity or other types of teachings in order to make a profit for themselves and become very rich and very wealthy. So if somebody chooses to support those individuals, that's their choice. If somebody chooses to do that, that's their choice. But in terms of the teachings of the Buddha, you shouldn't see people that are doing that. And if they are doing it, then you might decide whether or not it'd be wise to continue to support those people who are just using the resources that are being shared to indulge in those resources. Because the way that this should happen is, as I mentioned, a teacher should use a very small percentage of those offerings in order to sustain their life, and then there should be resources coming back to the community to help host the teachings and share the teachings with others. So that's the first reason why donations of support are needed in order to continue the teachings of the Buddha in the world. The second reason is that in order for you to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to practice generosity. You're going to need to practice generosity with lots of people in your life. And one of those individuals you might choose to practice generosity with is an individual who's helping you to learn. It's not something that a teacher should expect of you or require of you, but you might choose to share offerings with a teacher in terms of helping them to be able to offer the teachings to you and to others. And this helps your mind to eliminate any selfishness, because craving, desire, attachment is the cause of discontentedness. And as long as the mind has craving, desire, attachment, you're not going to be able to experience liberation and freedom of mind and get free of those discontent feelings. So breathing mindfulness meditation is training the mind to let go and eliminate craving, desire, attachment, but also generosity is training your mind to let go so that you can not be selfish. But oftentimes people struggle in this area to practice generosity. Remember, the Buddha didn't teach generosity to enrich himself, because he was a prince destined to become a king. He left that and he went into homelessness. He just went and stayed with his students. When his students would invite them to come stay, and they would feed him and they would clothe him and they would give him a shelter to stay, and then he shared teachings with them to help them. But he knew that in his current life and in his previous lives that he practiced a significant amount of generosity, and that's what helped him to be able to get to enlightenment as a Buddha. So you're going to need to practice generosity with people around you in order to get to enlightenment, in order to train your mind to not be selfish. And one of the ways you might choose to practice generosity is to support the teachings of the Buddha so that other people can get access to these. We talked about this back in chapter 10 of the book, and it's called What is Merit? It's helping you to understand to practice generosity, and if you'd like, you can support the teachings of the Buddha to come into the world. And this is what's going to help you to eliminate any kind of selfishness, enhancing the quality of your mind. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. Okay, Mayuli's asking a question here. She says, prior to discovering your classes, I was searching for my purpose in life. After discovering the words of the Buddha and studying from you, I have discovered my purpose, which is to get to the fourth stage of enlightenment. But instead of looking at it as a purpose in life, I should start looking at it as a goal to let go of the ego. Thank you, sir. Oh, yes, you're welcome, Mayuli. That's exactly what I would recommend for you. So that's great that you got that from our little talk here. Okay, Slav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
It's not straight related to subject and lecture which one you talking today, but it's still maybe beneficial for practitioners. So we have Eightfold Path, and it's kind of like a little complicated to practice same time all eight line of this path. But what about if we just simplify, for example, we just do wholesome and delete unwholesome thinking, unwholesome speech, unwholesome action. I give you example. For example, you talk to a person and this person so irritate you and it's so egoistic, and you think about kind of like something bad about this, let's irritate you, you want to push this person away, or even worse, punch him, you just stop, delete this thinking process, and you just change for this person is poor because he's so egoistic, and just see a starting change for compassion. It's considered you practice Eightfold Path.
So if you understand I'm sorry, are you done, Slav?
Yes.
Okay. If you understand the Eightfold Path, then you would understand that this person isn't irritating you. That's not what's actually occurring. What's occurring is the mind has craving and it's irritating itself. The mind is causing the irritation itself. So in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to know the Eightfold Path inside and out, backwards and forwards, like the back of your hand. You're going to need to know it that closely, using the original words of the Buddha, the way that I teach in all the various programs. So while sometimes the mind might think that they can summarize it or just kind of gloss over it and kind of like think of it in summary form, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment that way. You're going to need to know it in detail, inside and out, backwards and forwards. And that's why I cover it at the very beginning of the group learning program in 3 separate classes. I dive into it in a lot of detail. And then in chapter 5, I go into it in a lot of detail too. So in the group learning program, students learn it right up front in detail. And I encourage anybody and everybody who's interested in getting to enlightenment to be sure they study it in the book and they study it in the classes and all the other resources, because that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. You need to know that right up front as you start your journey to enlightenment, inside and out, backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I understand about you have to know, but my question was about practice. How you're able to practice if you're not able to practice simultaneously all 8 steps?
Yeah, you should be practicing simultaneously all 8 steps. So, for example, you have right view. If you have right view, you understand that your mind is causing your own discontentedness and is caused by craving, desire, attachment. That's right view. And then you have right intention, which is those 3 aspects of right intention. And then you're speaking and you're using right speech and you're paying attention to your bodily actions and you're practicing your right livelihood and you're applying right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration all at the same time. That's what you're actually doing, that while you're speaking, you're also practicing mindfulness and concentration and right effort, and all those things are needing to come together all at the same time as you're working on the path.
Yeah, it's actually what I mean. Kind of like, it's not just looking for shortcuts. It's kind of like how you apply it in realistic stuff. And now, like you point, I see connection, because even to speak, you have to apply all 8 steps right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the more
Thank you so much.
And the more familiar you are with it, the more deeply soaked into the mind, if you've revisited it multiple times, it'll become easier and easier for you to practice it. When you first get started, it's a real challenge just to learn it, right? That's part of the challenge, but you step up to that challenge. And then you have to revisit it multiple times to really get it to soak in so that you can go out into the world and really, truly practice it.
Thank you, Teacher Dave.
Yes, you're welcome, sir. Okay, let me check online to see if we have any more questions before we move on. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so let's move on to the next topic, which at the very end of the book, I share how to determine if you've attained enlightenment, because all through the book, I'm teaching students how to get to enlightenment, and then I teach at the very end how to determine if you've attained enlightenment. Well, the first thing is that a person who's attained enlightenment will never stop practicing the teachings. That on your way to enlightenment, it can be a real challenge. There can be various struggles and difficulties along the way. It's not just ice cream and candy on the way to enlightenment. There's some real struggles and some real difficulties along the way, but that's why you have a teacher. That's why you're part of a community, so that you can get help on your journey to enlightenment. But by the time somebody gets to enlightenment, they will be practicing these teachings with ease, where on your way to enlightenment, it can be a struggle sometimes. It can be difficult to arise the wisdom and arise the effort and energy and diligence to practice them. But by the time you get to enlightenment, if you've attained enlightenment, you'll never stop practicing the teachings. But by that point, your mind has been fully upgraded. Just like a computer system, you're upgrading from an old archaic operating system to this new operating system in your mind. And by that time, it's so effortless. Like when you're moving from one operating system to the other, it can be a real challenge to get up and running on this new operating system. But once you're up and running on it, you can do it effortlessly. You don't even have to think about where the icons are. You can almost do it with your eyes closed. Well, the same thing is true by the time your mind upgrades to this enlightened mental state. You can practice the teachings with your eyes closed, that your mind is just always practicing the teachings. So you'll never stop practicing the teachings if you've attained enlightenment. Number 2, you will be fully practicing the Eightfold Path, which includes the Four Noble Truths and the 5 Precepts. These are teachings and others that integrate into the Eightfold Path. So you will know the Eightfold Path inside and out, backwards and forwards by the time you get to enlightenment. You'll be able to describe it without even having any visual aids or anything, because you would have had to learn it and commit it to memory in order for you to go out into the world and actually practice it. So if somebody asks you a question like, what is right speech? You'd be able to boop, 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 boop. You'd be able to explain it very easily. Or what is right action? Boop, 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 boop. Or what is right livelihood? Boop, 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 boop. Because you would have had to practice it in order to be able to train the mind to get to enlightenment. So you'd be able to explain the Eightfold Path because you're practicing it very closely. Number 3 is when you have fully attained enlightenment as an arahant, you will have eliminated all the 10 fetters. So all those 10 pollutions, the defilements, the taints that the Buddha describes, you will have eliminated and eradicated all of those. And I'm going to be teaching a retreat coming up in August here in Chiang Mai, but I'm going to be live streaming it, and it's available on Zoom as well, and it's going to be recorded, where I'm going to go through each individual fetter. I'm going to explain to you what it is. I'm going to explain to you the symptoms that it causes. I'm going to explain to you how to eliminate it. And I'm going to explain to you how you know when it's actually been eliminated. So this is something that you'll be able to understand and practice if you're enlightened. You would be able to know what each one of those fetters are and how to eradicate them and so forth. Number 4 is you will have cultivated a mind that is completely practicing the Brahma Viharas. This was something that I shared back in chapter 14 of volume 1. These are called the healthy mental states: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. You will know what those 4 healthy mental states are and be able to practice them readily in your life. Number 5 is you will be fully practicing the 7 factors of enlightenment. This is documented in volume 1, chapter 3. And I'm going to be teaching them to you next week in our Sunday class, that these 7 factors of enlightenment, they're not to determine if you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. Some people think that's what they are, but actually what they are is they're a tool to fine-tune the mind so that you can train the mind and fine-tune it and bring it to the middle. So I'm going to explain them to you next week. So you would be practicing the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then 6, the ultimate way that you'll know that your mind is enlightened is that you'll know for yourself you've attained enlightenment because you will have eliminated 100% of discontentedness from the mind. You will notice that it's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You haven't been angry, you haven't been frustrated, you haven't been irritated, you haven't had the slightest annoyance in your mind. There isn't even the slightest ickiness in the mind of an enlightened being, that your mind is always bright and radiant and uplifted, not excited the way that you might think about that in the unenlightened state. Your mind's relaxed and calm, but yet it's attentive and alert. That's what the enlightened mind is experiencing, where you're relaxed and calm, but the mind is attentive and alert, that you have joy in the mind, you have peace in the mind, it's easy for you to smile, there isn't even the slightest ickiness in the mind. You'll notice that you don't get exhausted and tired anymore. It's not like a drag to go through life, but instead your mind is uplifted. Your mind gets sleepy where you need to sleep, but your mind is uplifted, it's bright, it's radiant, it's joyful. You won't have any discontentedness whatsoever. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this, how to determine whether you've attained enlightenment or not. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So I'm going to move on to just some kind of final words that the Buddha was sharing as he was nearing closer and closer to death, and some things that I put towards the end of the book just to kind of close out the book, where here the Buddha is teaching something to his ordained practitioners as he's getting closer and closer to death, because he knew 3 months before he was going to die. He gave people a heads up. 3 months before, that's how enlightened he was, that he knew exactly when he was going to die. So 3 months ahead, he was kind of preparing people for his death. So this is one of the things that he said, is he said, "Wander forth, O monks, for the welfare of the multitude, for the peacefulness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the good, welfare, and peacefulness of heavenly beings and humans. Teach, O monks, the teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. Reveal the perfectly complete and purified holy life. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are falling away because they do not hear the teachings. There will be those who will understand the teachings." So here he's encouraging his students to go off and share the teachings with those people who are interested in learning them, for the good, welfare, peacefulness of heavenly beings and human beings. And the Buddha teaches that when a teacher is teaching, that within their discourse or within the period of time that they're sharing the teachings, it should be good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. This is so important. Whereas if you were having a particular talk and you weren't consciously, intelligently selecting the certain meaning and phrasing and the words that you were using, your students wouldn't be able to understand what it is that the teachings are that lead to enlightenment. So in order to get to enlightenment, an individual is going to need to know vocabulary and use the appropriate word choices in any particular setting that they're teaching in. And nowadays, with so many people that are speaking English as an additional language, that it's not their primary language, it's so important that when we teach the Buddhist teachings in English, that we use common language and that we don't use very difficult and challenging vocabulary words. So when I teach, I'm very conscious to use wording and phrasing that will describe the teachings of the Buddha accurately, but also that doesn't use a lot of complicated language where people would have difficulties understanding it. So this is teachings from the Buddha. And he says, your teaching should be good in the beginning, middle, and end. Meaning you shouldn't start off strong and then you kind of fade away as a teacher, or start off kind of weak and then kind of build towards the end. Instead, your talks, when you're sharing his teachings, should be good in the beginning, middle, and end, so that way the students are interested in learning and understanding what it is that you have to say. And here he's saying how there's beings with very little dust in their eyes that are falling away because they don't hear the teachings. What he's talking about here is if you sleep and you get this little dust in your eyes when you wake up, and you have to clear out this little dust in your eyes as you wake up in the morning, it's the same thing, that if your mind is sleeping, meaning you're unenlightened, and you have very little dust in your eyes, that means your mind's not really polluted very much, and you just need to kind of clean up a couple of things in your mind in order to get to this enlightened mental state. There's people who have studied with me that they're fairly peaceful, they're fairly joyful, they have a couple little problems in their life here and there, but with a little bit of learning of the teachings, they can make pretty good progress on the path to enlightenment with some very basic beginning teachings and just kind of helping them along a little bit. Within 6 months or a year or 2 years, they're in a completely different mental state than they were in the past because they had very little dust in their eyes. So the Buddha is saying, hey, there's people out there that just need a little bit of help. So go out there and share the teachings. And of course, there's also people who need a lot of help too. And those people can come and learn too. So these are some words of the Buddha as he was getting nearer and closer to death. These are actually words from me in the back of the book where I say the only war worth waging is the war within the mind. Win that war and you have won everything. I wrote this long before the current wars that are happening in the world are actually occurring, but there's nothing beneficial from any war that I've ever seen that happens in the world. It's just a bunch of death and destruction and all kinds of problems that are happening whenever there's a war that's going on. But there's this war inside one's own mind when they're unenlightened. And what I was encouraging students to think about is to fight that war or wage that war, right? Because then when you win that war, you've won everything. Because when you sort out your mind and you get to this enlightened mental state, then you won everything. You've won the peace. You've won the calmness, the serenity, the contentedness, and the joy. You've won no discontentedness for the rest of your life, or the rest of your existence, long into the future, right? So win that war. That's the only war that's truly worth waging. This is one of the teachings that the Buddha was sharing as he was dying. It wasn't his actual last words, but it was when he was informing his students that he was going to be dying in 3 months. There was one particular student that was really attached to the Buddha, and he was holding on to the Buddha, and he was pleading with the Buddha not to die. And the Buddha was saying to him, he said, "One who sees the teachings sees me. One who sees me sees the teachings." What he was saying here to his student, and there's more that he said besides this, is that he was saying, you don't need me anymore. You don't need this physical body. You don't need this physical body to be in existence, because for the last 45 years, I've shared these teachings. I've shared these teachings with you. I've helped you understand what it takes to get to enlightenment. You don't need this physical body anymore. So one who sees the teachings sees me. What he was saying is if you understand the teachings close enough, you can look around the world and you will see me everywhere, because you will see my teachings everywhere, because he explained the way that the world is. And when you walk down the street and you see a crack in the sidewalk, that's impermanence. And what the Buddha is saying is, if you see the teachings, you see me, because you can see his teachings everywhere around you. And then when he says, one who sees me sees the teachings, meaning he's a living, breathing, walking example of his teachings. That if you see him, you see his teachings, because he's practicing his teachings readily. So this was a teaching that he shared with one of his close students as he was pleading and begging with him to not die. He was saying, hey, if you see the teachings, you see me. And if you see me, you see the teachings. So you don't need this body any longer. And then these are the actual last words of the Buddha prior to his death. He's talking to Ananda, which is one of his close students. He says, Ananda, it may be that you will think the teacher's instruction has ceased. Now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like this, Ananda, for what I have taught and explained to you as teachings and discipline will, at my passing, be your teacher. Now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. So here, what he's saying is, you don't need this body to be able to learn and practice the teachings. The teachings that I shared with you, that will be your teacher. Learn the teachings that I shared with you. And then he reminds them that all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. What he's doing is he's capturing his very first teaching as his last words, because a Buddha would know that his last words would have been very important and they would have been emphasized throughout the world. So he left his very last teaching when he was dying to be his very first teaching, which is the universal truth of impermanence, encouraging people to understand that even he is impermanent. Even that physical body that he was inhabiting, that's impermanent, because all things that are conditioned are in nature to decay. So even he has to die himself. And then he encourages them to strive on untiringly. So this was the Buddha's last words at the time of his death. And he was an amazing man. He shared amazing teachings that absolutely lead exactly where he said they do, to this peaceful and joyful mental state. And the more you learn and practice them, the more you can understand that, and you can experience the peace and joy that comes with the enlightened mind. So let me know if you guys have any questions about anything I've been sharing this evening, or maybe it's morning where you're at, or afternoon. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'll do is just thank all of you guys for attending class. And if you've been attending throughout the program, or you've gotten to a point where maybe you've even been listening to some of the recordings as you were missing classes, or maybe you've only ever been able to listen to the recordings, I would like to just take a moment here to thank all of you for any kind of contributions you've made to help this program be successful, whether it's just attending, whether it's asking questions, whether it's supporting the work that I do through generous offerings or anything like that. I'd like to just share my sincere thanks and appreciation for everything that you guys do to help me and support me to be able to share these teachings into the world. So thank you for all of that. And I'd like to let you know that because I'm very interested in seeing more and more people to learn and practice these teachings, I'm going to be continuing these programs long into the future. So this program is going to restart on the 17th of March, and you can start from the very beginning if you like. Next week, I'm going to be sharing the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment to help you understand the obstacles that you're going to encounter on the way to enlightenment. Those 5 hindrances are teachings from the Buddha, as well as the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then the week after that, we're going to be restarting from the very beginning. Tomorrow, I'm going to be starting a Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course from Monday through Friday, and I'm going to be live streaming that through YouTube, Facebook, and I'll have Zoom open as well. So if you can't attend live, you'll be able to listen to the recordings through YouTube or Facebook. So all the classes, courses, and retreats that I offer here in Chiang Mai now, I'm going to be live streaming them and having Zoom open as well. So you guys are welcome to attend any of the courses like the Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment, Harmony in Relationships, Experiencing the Jhanas and the 4 stages of enlightenment. There's 2 retreats that I teach, one in January and one in August. The one in January is everything you need to get to the first stage of enlightenment. The one in August is everything you need to get to enlightenment from the first stage to enlightenment itself. So you can have access to all of these things through YouTube, Facebook, or Zoom. And then remember, you can always reach out for personal guidance as well. You can get the books, audiobooks, videos, podcasts. Everything's available at no cost. I'm very motivated to be able to help you to get to enlightenment, but you'll need to apply the dedication, the determination, and the diligence to apply the effort and energy to do the work. So if you're willing to do that work, I'm here to support you. So thank you all for your time and your effort, your energy to come to class each time and learn the teachings. And if you'd like to start over from the beginning, that's what I'm going to be doing. And if you'd like to move into the Pali Canon and English study group, you're welcome to do that as well. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.